Well, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome in across the continent and beyond for another very exciting Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants broadcast. If you're joining us for the first time, like some of you are today, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. And you're catching us on a very special day because we are continuing my favorite of all our series, Don't Tell the Other series. This is the Wild Hope series. So I am all about sharing the most amazing, tangible stories of conservation and action on planet Earth. And Wild Hope is an incredible series. You can check it all out on YouTube on wildhope.tv, featuring some of those stories from some of the most amazing conservationists on planet Earth. We featured everything from gardens to deep sea to big cats in California and beyond. We're on like 14 broadcasts of them over the years, and I can't encourage you enough to go check out the series. Well, today, we are bringing in the amazing folks at the Orianne Society, Dr. Chris Jenkins, to talk about some of the incredible work they do on reptiles specifically. Now, as someone who grew up with Steve Irwin and David Attenborough, reptiles are my favorite group of animals. I love crocodilians and snakes and all sorts of incredible things that we don't typically feature in a lot of conservation shows. So I'm really excited we have the chance to meet a few epic animal ambassadors today. And without further ado, I'm going to zip it and turn you over to Dr. Chris. Thank you so much for joining us today, and welcome to the broadcast.
Thank you, Jesse. It's great to be here.
It's nice to have you. Now, I know you have a lot to share with us. So you've got this big, beautiful presentation, which you can walk me through, and you've got some fun guys we're going to meet in person as well. So if you want to lead us underway and walk me through the slides, let's do this thing.
Yeah, let's get going here.
Awesome.
So today, I am going to talk to you about some of the most amazing animals on the planet. Reptiles in general, and reptiles are just fascinating. Their biology is so different than some of the animals we might think about, day to day, some of the mammals and birds. So reptiles are just really unique, and they're also really huge in terms of conservation. So as an example of that, turtles are the most endangered group of animals on the planet, with over 60% of all turtle species classified as endangered with extinction. So today we're going to focus on one particular turtle and how that turtle is so important to a whole suite of different animals. And that turtle is the gopher tortoise. Go ahead, Jesse. And if we start thinking about tortoises here in North America, there are 4 tortoise species that you see represented here. But if you go to the next slide, you'll see that only one of them, the gopher tortoise, occurs down in the southeastern U.S. The other 3 all live in southwestern parts of North America, in the deserts and places like Texas and Arizona and New Mexico. But today we're going to focus on that one species that lives in the southeast. Next slide. And if we look at where gopher tortoises live, you can see that they occur throughout really the low country of the South. So you find them especially in places like Florida and Georgia, where their populations are strongest. But you also find populations in places like Alabama and South Carolina and Mississippi. And west of Mobile Bay, in that area you see that's shaded red, they are listed as a federally endangered species, or they're technically listed as threatened because their populations are so low. And throughout the rest of their range, they've been a candidate to go on the endangered species list. So they're of great conservation need. Go ahead, Jesse. And they live in kind of a very interesting ecosystem. They primarily live in what's called the longleaf pine ecosystem. And there you see a map that shows you about where that occurred historically, and a picture of what that ecosystem would look like. But that ecosystem over the last 200 plus years has declined. It's declined to the point where there's less than 3% of it remaining. And that 3% it's just very limited in distribution. And there's a lot of people working on restoring this ecosystem and the species that depend on it. Again, species like gopher tortoises. Go ahead, Jesse. And one interesting thing about this ecosystem and the tortoise itself is that it has a relationship with fire. You might think of fire in forests as a bad thing, but down in these longleaf pine ecosystems where the tortoises live, fire is critically important. Fires naturally would have happened every 2, 3, 4 years. So if we want to have gopher tortoises and all the other species that they live with, we need to actually burn these forests to maintain their habitat. Next slide. And what those fires do is they do two things for the tortoise. They keep the forest relatively open, so there's a lot of sun, and the tortoises can kind of regulate their temperatures. But then they also produce all of these beautiful wildflowers and grasses we like to call green groceries. These are the things that the tortoises need to eat and survive. Next slide. So talking about the tortoise, they're important in and of themselves, but what makes them so important is that they're truly a keystone species. And I'll describe what that is. But the reason they're a keystone is that thing you see behind this tortoise. There's kind of that dark hole. So go to the next slide. And this is a tortoise inside one of those holes. They call these gopher tortoises because they dig holes. They dig burrows. These burrows can go 20, 30 feet underground, and they're so important for so many other animals. We know that over 350 other species of plants, animals, mammals, birds, insects, they all use these burrows, and many of them need the burrows to survive. So go to the next slide, Jesse. And there's this concept, I'm not going to go into it in detail, but the concept of food webs, and that's just an ecological term that talks about how all animals in nature are connected, meaning, hawks eat mice and mice eat grass and so on. And so all of these animals are all connected. And the gopher tortoise supports all of this because so many of these species need the tortoise to survive. Next slide. And I want to just in a very simple way tell you what this keystone species means. And so if you imagine, like in this picture, we're going to build a doorway out of rocks, and you start piling rocks up, right? And then as you start to get to the arch, you need to put this very special stone in the rocks, and it holds up the entire arch. Otherwise, if you pulled that out, the entire thing would fall apart. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see this diagram that I put together that just shows the tortoise as the keystone in this ecosystem. So if we don't conserve gopher tortoises and you pull that keystone out of the longleaf pine ecosystem, many of those other species of reptiles and amphibians and grasses and many of these things would collapse. So the tortoise is critically important. Next slide. And now, actually, you can go back to full screen, Jesse. I just want to introduce you to this guy. This is Mr. Little.
He's so great.
And Mr. Little is a gopher tortoise, and you can see they're relatively big animals. This is a full-size adult. And if you can see the front leg's kind of flattened, and they use that leg to dig those burrows that I was talking about. They're just really large, beautiful animals, whereas the back leg, you can see, looks more kind of like an elephant leg. They use that just to plant themselves in the ground as those front legs are digging. Another interesting thing I'll show you on this tortoise, this is a male, and this is the plastron part of the shell, whereas the top would be called the carapace. So on the plastron, there's this thing right here, this special scoot. Males have these, and they come together, and they use as like battle rams when they're fighting for females. So just a really interesting animal. They live incredibly long. We know of some tortoises in the wild that are approaching 100 years. So just a really special, important animal for the ecosystem. And I'm going to give that back. And then you can go back to the slides, Jesse.
Yeah.
Next slide. And so what you're seeing here is one of my colleagues, and he's at one of those burrows. All that white sand is the sand that the tortoises had dug up and creating the burrow. And what he's doing is he's taking a long camera on a hose, and he's running that camera down into the tortoise burrow. And that's how we survey for these tortoises and many of the species that live with them. So next slide. And one of the really interesting and important animals that they absolutely need these tortoise burrows to survive the winter is one of North America's greatest snakes. This is the Eastern Indigo Snake. It's the largest native snake in North America, the record being 8.5 feet long. And their Latin name is Drymarchon. So the genus is Drymarchon. And that loosely translates to emperor of the forest or ruler of the forest. And there's kind of good reasoning for that. First of all, they're this top predator. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute, but they have these huge home ranges, just like any other predator, like a tiger in Asia or any other large predator. They have to cover large amounts of ground to find their prey. So indigo snakes are using thousands and thousands of hectares every year just to live out their life cycle and find the food that they need. So again, Eastern indigo snakes, emperor of the forest. Next slide. And to even illustrate that more, the primary thing that they eat are other snakes. So this is an eastern diamondback rattlesnake, which is the largest rattlesnake species in the world. And this indigo snake grabbed this diamondback kind of mid-body and walked his way up towards the head. Next slide. And here you can see the diamondback has bitten and injected venom into this indigo, but indigo snakes are somewhat immune to the venom of the snake species that they eat. Next slide. And here you can go right through these, Jesse, just to show the progression. Great. So indigo snakes, again, emperor of the forest. They are a federally endangered species in the United States. They live in a very similar area to the gopher tortoise. They live in the southeastern part of the U.S. And here you can kind of see how big this snake is. Here's a woman holding one, and it also illustrates one of the other really fascinating things about this animal. So despite being this voracious predator, a predator of other predators, because all snakes are carnivores. So this is a top apex predator in these systems, feeding on snakes. But then in the hands of a human, they just are incredibly docile. And that's whether you're holding a captive animal or whether you go out into the wild and find one. They're just very docile snakes. Next slide. And, I put indigo snakes in the hands of tens of thousands of kids every year. They're incredible ambassadors for conservation of reptiles. And you can go to full screen. Yeah, I'll use that. Okay.
So I'm so excited. Professional detachment out the window. Look at this glorious snake. Wow.
Okay, so this here is an Eastern indigo snake. As I mentioned, these are top predators. You can see the light hitting its body, some of that sheen. It has a really iridescent sheen in the light. And so these animals, again, they just travel incredible distances looking for prey. And they spend the winter in the tortoise burrows. Without the tortoises, these snakes couldn't survive. It's almost like this is a species of snake that kind of got trapped in the southeast. All the other members of this genus of snake are kind of Central and South American. They're much more of a tropical snake, but this is in the subtropical and even the temperate regions of the southeast. So in the winter, they live in those tortoise burrows, but then they leave those, and in the warmer months, they travel down and they head into swamps and wet forests, places like that, where there's an abundance of other snakes and different types of food that they can feed on. So again, top predator, endangered species, just a real icon and a great ambassador for conservation of reptiles and conservation of ecosystems in southeastern North America.
Super cool. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah. So you can go next slide. So I'm not going to go into great detail here, but I did want to mention that the Orianne Society and a whole suite of our partners are working on conserving these types of animals. What you're looking at here is a map of South Georgia, and all those different color polygons or shapes that you see, these are gopher tortoise populations. These are all the remaining gopher tortoise, significant or viable gopher tortoise populations left in the state of Georgia. And which also means that in many of those places, those are places where indigo snake populations survive as well. And so we've been part of a huge partnership with agencies, both state and federal, as well as other nonprofits and universities. And we've been working on conserving these. And we have now conserved half of the gopher tortoise populations in the state of Georgia. So we have 65 of the 128 remaining gopher tortoise populations now protected, in that the land that they live on is in some form of conservation. Many of those properties are actually public land. They're state properties now where you can go out and you can hike or bird watch or fish or hunt or whatever it is you like to do. Look for gopher tortoises. So yeah, we do a lot of conservation work trying to save these animals and prevent those declines. Next slide. Another example of some of the work we do here in this slide, you see some of our colleagues and staff members, when something like a development, let's say like a Walmart is going to go in and it's going to go on the top of a gopher tortoise population, we will go in and what you're looking at in the top two left pictures are us finding where the gopher tortoises are and trapping them. In that third picture, you actually see a tortoise in the trap. So we go in, we trap all the tortoises before the Walmart or whatever it might be comes in ahead on top of them. And then the bottom picture on the right, you see this fence. And what we do is we set up these areas, these fenced in areas, many hectares of fencing. We put the tortoises in those places on protected habitat, and we get those tortoises imprinted on those properties. And then we remove those fences about a year later to help restore and bolster existing tortoise populations. And there's many, many more things we do for tortoise conservation, but I don't really have time today, and I want to give you guys plenty of time to ask me any questions you might have about turtles, reptiles, snakes, anything really on your mind. Next slide, Jesse. And I'll just throw this up here. If any of you are interested in learning more about the work we do with tortoises or indigo snakes, and we work well beyond that as well. We work on a lot of species up north. And, I know a lot of the schools on here are kind of more northern schools. So we do a lot of work on wood turtles and other species like that. So with that, I will just, I'll give it back to you, Jesse, but I'm here to keep the conversation going.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. We got to meet two incredible animals. We did a deep dive on some epic conservation stuff. Chris, that was fantastic, man. We're going to dive in with Q&A, as you said. So we've got Mr. Hancock and Mrs. Fisher's class live with us on camera. We got a bevy on YouTube. So YouTubers, please feel free, share your questions in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. I'm going to leave our live classes a second to put their thinking caps on. And a quick query for you. When you showed the gopher tortoise range, there were a few pockets. I could bring up that slide again, but there were like distinct areas that they weren't within Florida. Is there a reason for that? Are those where big cities are? I'll try and pull up the slides for us to see if we can check that out. But
so some of those ecosystems are different. For example, like down into like the Everglades, where you just have these extensive, just kind of like sea of grass, shallow water. Gopher tortoises live in relatively dry places. So yeah, in that map, South Florida doesn't show up. And I think Okefenokee, which is a big swamp on the border of Florida and Georgia, as well as maybe one of the other big lakes in Florida. So that really has to do with, those are really wet, like extensive swamp areas. And the tortoises only live in those dry, more upland habitats.
Perfect. Great first question, guys. All right. Mrs. Fisher's class, you got a student right at the camera. Come on up and take us away in Carsville. Hey.
How old can the tortoises live until?
Ooh.
So the tortoises, so the first thing I'd tell you is that turtles in general are some of the longest lived animals on the planet. There are some tortoise species, some of the giant ones like the Galapagos and the Aldabra tortoises, and we do a lot of work with the Aldabra tortoises. those species can live well over 100 years. Gopher tortoises, we know many of them that are somewhere between like 80 and 100. So they can probably live about the same length of time as a human, maybe longer.
Which is really neat. I want to stress, because we do a lot of programs on a wide array of animals. That's really unusual in the animal kingdom. Not many things live as long as we do. And so a cool question to kick us off, guys. Thanks, Mrs. Fisher's class. All right, Georgetown, Ontario, Mr. Hancock's group, come on in and take us away. Hey, guys. Oh, Mr. Hancock, your audio isn't working. I don't know why. There we are.
Am I back?
You're good.
Can you hear me now? All right, good. One of our students was wondering about the indigo snake. What does it feel like? And is it, deadly, venomous, poisonous?
Yeah.
Well, so the first thing I'd say is it's not venomous, or I would not be handling it like that. I do handle venomous snakes, but I wouldn't just be holding them like that, very carefree, with my hands. So it is not venomous. They do eat venomous snakes, and they look like some venomous snakes. They actually kind of are similar in appearance to some of the snakes in Australia, maybe some of the cobras as well, but they are not venomous. What it feels like, I would say it's actually a very smooth feeling snake. It's very dry. Lots of times people think, snakes can obviously be in the water and be wet, but people picture snakes sometimes as being like slimy. Most of the time they're not. They're just very dry, and indigo snakes feel very smooth. There are some snakes that feel very rough because they have what's called keeled scales, or they have a little ridge on each of their scales. And essentially it's almost like helps the camouflage. It adds like a 3D nature to the camouflage. But an indigo snake is a very smooth feeling snake. And I'd say indigos, really as well as all snakes, they're just one big long series of muscles, and you really feel that. So you can feel all the strength and the muscles when you're holding them as well.
I hope our classes get the chance to hold a snake. I've held many snakes. It's one of the great experiences you can have. And it's really hard. It's funny. You didn't come up with an analogy there. The smooth ones are hard. The rough ones, the best analogy I've ever heard is like a seatbelt. Is like the closest thing that some of our kids might feel in their everyday life. But smooth snakes are really, they're a special feeling. Like they're great in so many ways. So cool question, guys. We had an indigo snake question too. When you brought your one out, it looked like it had a bit of a cloudy eye. Is there a reason for that? Or is that just a trick of the light in our camera? What's the deal?
So snakes, when they, as they grow, they shed their skin, and they shed it typically in one large piece. And so snakes do end up getting a cloudy eye. And what that is when so first of all, snakes don't have eyelids. They can't close their eyes. And so when a snake is going to shed its skin, it actually is shedding the kind of cap over the eye as well. And so that cloudy look comes from like the layer of skin that's about to shed, and the new layer underneath. Between those, there's a thin layer of like liquid. And so when they're about to shed, their eyes get cloudy. But that snake just shed. And what that actually is that particular snake has issues, and that when it sheds, for some reason, one of its eye caps oftentimes stays on. And so it just shed the other day. And what we need to do is we spray its head down with water, and that cap will come off. So you're right. Snakes do get cloudy eyes before they shed their skin. This happens to be that one little scale over the eye on that snake is still stuck on there, and we need to get it off.
Cool. I've never heard of something like that happening. That's so neat. And again, classrooms, if you ever get the chance to see a snake shed or hold it in your hand, a lot of zoos and aquaria will often have this as like a biofact that they can bring out. It's really, really special, especially like a bigger snake like our indigo snake. There's a lot of stuff there to work with. Imagine if all your skin peeled off in one big go and you walked out of it and it was just a sheath on the ground. It'd be very odd. Snakes do that all the time. So cool query, guys. All right, Mrs. Fisher's class, we're going to head back to you guys live. Come on in with your second. Hey.
Why do tortoises go so slow?
Why do tortoises go so slow? Because there are different trade-offs in nature. So say you're trying to escape a predator, you could be the type of animal that's very, very fast and could get away from it quickly. Or you could be a type of animal that's slow, but you build a lot of armor around yourself, like a tortoise. And so a tortoise has picked that side of the trade-off, where the way it defends itself against predators, it just has this incredible armor all around its body. And in doing that, then it doesn't need to have all the other muscles and all these other things that would need to go very fast. So it's just kind of different strategies in nature. The tortoise has armor essentially, so it doesn't need to move very fast.
I love this question, and it leads us so great into our next one, which is a misconception of students and adults alike, but I love it. Can tortoises walk out of their shell? What's the deal, Chris?
No. So no turtles can leave their shell. You might see a cartoon or something where like a turtle goes out of its shell and the shell's sitting there spinning, but the shell is part of the turtle's body. And I was just looking around to see if we have a gopher tortoise shell. We have one somewhere. But anyways, you can actually, the ribs of a turtle are attached to the shell. They're part of the shell. So if you could look inside the top of the tortoise's shell, you would see the ribs running along the roof of the shell. So it is part of the animal. And if you were to try to, like, say you took a turtle and you like physically somehow ripped the shell off, you would kill the turtle. It's part of its skeleton, and it has blood vessels running all through it. So it is part of the turtle. They cannot leave the shell and survive.
Just like you can't walk away from your skeleton. As much as sometimes you may wish to, it's part of you. You're stuck. I love that. And you highlighted two terms, and I like highlighting these terms for classes. So plastron is that underneath part of the shell, and then the carapace or carapace is the upper part, sort of the back most of us think of when we think of a tortoise or turtle shell. So great query, guys. All right, Mr. Hancock, come on back in. Take us away with another. Hey.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of cartoons when I was a child, they just ran away from their shell. So maybe that's where the misconception comes from. One student was wondering, the snake lives in the burrow. Do they live with the turtle, or are they living in an abandoned burrow, or are they just cohabitating?
Cool question.
I did not hear a question, Jesse.
Oh, sorry, Chris. Yeah, no worries, man. So the question was, do indigo snakes, that you mentioned that they live inside the tortoise burrows, do they live with the tortoise? Like, are they cohabitating, or do they only come into abandoned burrows?
They'll use both. So, I mentioned that camera that we run down into the burrows. So if you run the camera down, there's many instances where first thing you'll see is an indigo snake, and then you kind of bump past the snake and you'll see the tortoise in there. So they definitely can be in the same burrows, but there are what we call abandoned tortoise burrows that the tortoises are no longer using, but they still have some of their structure, and snakes will definitely use those as well. So yes, they will be in the same burrows with the tortoise or even other animals that use the burrows.
Fascinating. I love that we got that question. Okay, a bit of a technical conservation one. You highlighted these areas in Georgia that you're helping to preserve. When you're preserving them, are you expanding upon the areas that already exist, or are you finding new pockets of the state and beyond to set up like a conservation area?
Well, it's a combination. So what we did is we started first of all with where are all the viable tortoise populations in the state of Georgia. We might have missed one or two, but we're pretty confident. We're at 128. And then from there, we wanted to have geographic representation. So we created what we called tortoise management units all across South Georgia. So, and then we had a goal in each of them. The idea being, so we don't conserve all of the tortoises in one corner of Georgia. We have good representation across the state. Then we would go in and kind of set priorities. And yes, some of them may have been, say, existing public land that we were buying land and adding on to, or, trying to get a private land adjacent to it under something like a conservation easement. And then, so it happened in so many different ways, but there were also some places that were completely, really incredible gopher tortoise populations that were kind of private land that were out on their own, not connected to existing conservation land. And then we'd buy those, the entire place, and create, say, a new state wildlife management area or some type of conservation land.
Perfect. Thank you for the nitty gritty. I know it's a bit of a complicated question, and this speaks to what happens in conservation of pretty much every kind of species. So whether it's mammals, birds, reptiles, some of our students might have experienced this answer before. So thank you for that, Chris. Cool one from online. And this could be really easy or it could be really hard before we go back to our live classes. Do you have a favorite reptile? No pressure.
A favorite reptile. So our organization works on all reptiles and amphibians. I would say personally, I'm really a venomous snake guy. I've done a lot of my personal work on venomous snakes over the years. And I guess if I had to pick, I kind of have two. One would be a timber rattlesnake. I have some of those downstairs. We should have brought one up. I didn't even think of it. But anyways, timber rattlesnake. And then I'm also really interested there's multiple species down in Central and South America called bushmasters. They're one of the largest vipers in the world, live in like really kind of pristine rainforest habitat. So if I had to pick, I'd probably say timber rattlesnakes, which are kind of my home rattlesnake, and bushmasters.
I will say I'm going to Costa Rica in a couple months, and one of my great goals is to find a bushmaster and maybe become the bushmaster while I'm down there. They're a very, very special snake. Timber rattlesnakes, too, are gorgeous, gorgeous rattlesnakes. I encourage our classes, look them up when we're done. And we're going to get back on talking about some venomous snake species soon, but we will head back to Mrs. Fisher's class first. Come on in and take us away, guys. Hey.
How fast can tortoises swim?
Good question. So, I don't know exactly how fast they can swim, but I will tell you that tortoises can swim. So a lot of people might think that gopher tortoise, you wouldn't find them swimming, but but we've seen them out in big, big rivers. I'm talking rivers that are, hundreds of meters across, and the tortoises will be out swimming across these. So while they're on land most of the time, they can swim. I honestly do not know how fast they can swim. I'm guessing they might be able to even swim faster than they can walk, but that's complete speculation.
Fascinating, though. I must say, like, as someone who's watched a bazillion hours, and I think that's an exact figure of natural history documentaries, I have never seen a tortoise swim in any fashion. So the fact that query is brought up, thanks, Mrs. Fisher's class. That's great. Mr. Hancock, and I'll relay the question if weirdly can't hear you again, but share away.
Sure. At the beginning, one of our students was really curious about snakes eating snakes. That doesn't seem very common. How can they do that?
Ooh.
Yeah, I did hear that. So it's... Again, remember I talked about like trade-offs in nature. So if you take within snakes, take like a rattlesnake, which we were talking about, versus like an indigo snake or a king snake. And you would think, people think of rattlesnakes as these like scary, tough animals. Their heads are actually much more fragile than like an indigo snake. So a rattlesnake's head, the bones would be relatively slight. There'd be a lot more cartilage, those types of things. And so rattlesnakes can open their mouths really wide. With this real fragile skull and swallow things that are much bigger than them. Whereas things like indigo snakes and king snakes, they've made this trade-off where their head's actually very bony, a lot of muscle. And one of the main ways that a lot of snake-killing snakes kill things, indigo snakes as well, is they have really strong bite. So they'll literally be grab other snakes, kind of crush their heads and swallow them whole. So and many of those snakes couldn't, like an indigo snake would have a very hard time eating like a big rabbit or something. Whereas you could have a smaller rattlesnake that could probably eat that rabbit, but an indigo couldn't because it has it's taken that part of the trade-off where it's got all this muscle and bone in its head and just can't open its mouth that wide. So they specialize in smaller things. And there's a lot of snakes around the world that eat other snakes. Some very popular ones, coral snakes oftentimes eat other snakes. King cobras are snake-eating snakes. So there's a lot of them out there.
In the last Planet Earth, I think Planet Earth 3 on the BBC, they actually have this incredible footage of a king cobra hunting other snakes, and it's just spectacular. Like, I can't encourage you to look it up enough. And I want to stress for our kids that might not know, like a python with a head about this big can eat a deer. Like, its jaw muscles and bones can disconnect, and it can swallow something that's way bigger than it. It's one of the most incredible things to witness in nature. We've done some really cool snake programs in the past on that. So great question, Mr. Hancock's class. All right, time flies and you're having fun. We're going to take 3 more questions before we wrap up. The first is, you mentioned holding a venomous snake or potentially having something like a rattlesnake. How do you go about doing that without risking yourself being bitten?
I do. Well, first of all, nobody should try to handle a venomous snake. It's a skill that you acquire over time. I've handled tens of thousands of venomous snakes over the years. I use different tools. You probably seen snake hooks, but when I want to physically hold them, do something called tubing them, where I get these clear plastic tubes and I put the tube over the snake's head. And when the snake goes in the tube, I grab where the tube and the snake's body comes out of it. And so the snake can't move and its head is stuck in this plastic tube. And then its body and its tail's right there. So I can do, if I need to measure it or do anything, say as part of our studies, I can do that with the snake, but I'm safely holding it because its head's in the tube. But it can be dangerous getting the snake into the tube. And again, I've done it thousands and thousands of times. So you always want to ask an adult or somebody before you ever try to handle a snake.
Yeah, I'm really glad we highlighted this. And usually it's the case that when it's animals that people have a hard time holding, it's something like a bat where you're more likely to do harm to it. It's a really rare situation in our history at Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants where the animal could, in theory, do you harm. But again, as you mentioned, experience is everything. If you're really keen on this, kids, though, you'd go to a place like a zoo, like a Orianne Society, like somewhere that actually has these snakes, and you'd learn from someone who's a master at it, like Dr. Chris. So if you're keen on that, I'd be keen on that in the future. Find an opportunity to volunteer, and you'll see what might be possible in your life. So,
yeah,
cool
there are multiple classes available, venomous snake killing classes at universities and things like that. If you're interested.
Really cool. How about that? See, news to me. I'm learning everything in this program. It's been very exciting. Mrs. Fisher's class, we're going to head to you guys for your last question. We'll wrap up with Mr. Hancock in a minute. Come on in, guys. Hey.
How many tortoises are there?
Ooh.
How many species of tortoise in the world? Put me on the spot. I don't remember. I don't remember, to be quite honest with you. But there's 4 in North America. There's multiple in South America, and then as you head into like Africa, there are many species. The same in Southeast Asia. So I can't answer your question. You stumped me.
Yes. I love when we stump the scientists. One of my very favorite goals of the program. I'm going to try and Google it while we do our last question here in a minute. So I have a tortoise query question for you guys. But way to go, Mrs. Fisher's class. Well done. Mr. Hancock, we're going to head to you for one final question. Thanks so much. And come on in to wrap us up.
Hey. Awesome. Quick Google says 49 species.
Hey.
But we're all the way up here in Ontario, Canada. What can we do to help the turtles?
Yes.
So the first thing I would say is that locally there are many turtles. While you don't have tortoises, there are many turtle species up in that region. So for example, you do have a species that we do quite a bit of work on called a wood turtle. They're about to become federally listed in the US. They're an endangered species globally. They're like a river turtle that's winters in rivers, and then they use the uplands surrounding rivers. And so I would encourage you to get on our website and look at our work with wood turtle conservation, and then also look locally. I know there are multiple projects in Ontario and other places working with these species. So you can get involved in many different ways. Most of our wood turtle work is over in New England, but we do work with volunteers and school groups. You can become a member of the Orianne Society, and those membership dollars or any donation you make, you can direct those towards conservation of gopher tortoises or wood turtles, as an example, or really anything we do. And then I would just say, generally, some things you can do in your day-to-day life. There are many species you might, for example, see on the road, and if you're with an adult. And traffic situations safe, I oftentimes will move those turtles across the road because many turtles die on the roads every year. Many turtle species are really dependent on wetlands. So one great thing you could do locally is get involved with wetlands restoration and wetlands conservation. Oftentimes there'll be local land trusts and wetland type conservancy nonprofits, and wetland conservation in general is a very good thing for turtles. So lots of different things, and I could keep going on that, but check out our website and please become a member.
They do such spectacular work at the Orianne Society. I can't recommend it enough. I will say for our Ontario crew, the Toronto Zoo has some really cool things with Blandings turtles in particular. I've had the chance to re-release them into Rouge National Park. So a really cool option there. And I really encourage you, check out wood turtles because they're so freaky. They can freeze in the winter entirely, which if we did that, we would die. So wood turtles have some really cool adaptations to survive our cold winters and are very, very special. And you mentioned something in that, Dr. Chris, and we've talked about this with a lot of turtle people in the past. If you ever do help a turtle turtle across the road, make sure to put it on the side that it's going. So if a turtle's walking left across the road, don't put it back over on the right because it's just going to cross the road right back again. So keep that in mind if you're ever in that situation. Be careful depending on the turtle that you're picking up, but all of these are great options, and I love that your class is keen on this. Dr. Chris, before we wrap up, we've highlighted the website a lot. We've highlighted some of your amazing species. Is there any last message you want to leave us with before we bring in our classes to say a big thank you and farewell?
No, I'd just say that I appreciate everybody having me and listening to everything I had to say today. And then, as you move on through your lives, whatever you do, think about these animals too, meaning reptiles and amphibians. These are the animals that people, many people kind of love to hate. They're the animals that are oftentimes forgotten. And so these are animals that really need help in many cases. And because they don't receive the focus of many others, it's a place where you can really make a difference. So whether it's getting involved with the Orianne Society or nonprofits or agencies close to you, zoos, just think about these animals. They're kind of unique and they need help. A lot of people really don't like them. So you can make a difference there.
Well, I certainly think you've helped a lot of students like them a lot today. Dr. Chris, so thank you so much for this. Mrs. Fisher's class, Mr. Hancock, our YouTube audience. If you're on YouTube and you want to scream and yell and annoy the principal too as we wrap up our broadcast, you have our permission. Please do. But we'll bring in Ontario, Michigan. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a wonderful day. Bye for now, everyone.